minute. Jai Bhim, Salam, and hello to everyone. We are in a wonderful occasion today because Omar Kasmani, our wonderful speaker, is coming in from Karachi. We have many other people who are coming in from India, South Africa, the UK, and of course the US. So it is truly a joyous gathering place. My name is Anjali Arundekar. I am the founding director for the Center for South Asian Studies at UC Santa Cruz. And along with my very deft and brave comrade, Radhika Prasad, who's our graduate associate, we have managed to overcome the impossibility of time zones, technological difficulties, and cross-border tensions, all in the moment of this talk. But before further ado, I want to say a little bit about our center and a little bit about why Dr. Kasmani is the perfect speaker for the series that we are currently running. So our Center for South Asian Studies at UC Santa Cruz is intimate, fierce, and ferocious, and has been around now for almost 4 years. We began in the pandemic, and that allowed us to create a gathering space for people across time zones, and it became a sanctuary for many of us who were stuck in homes and worried about our loved ones all over the world. So our center focuses explicitly on questions of justice, broadly defined economic, feminist, aesthetic, environmental, social, and so much more in South Asia and the broader Indian Ocean world. We have worked very hard over the past 4 years to curate conversations that both foreground and challenge continued histories of occupation, authoritarianism marked by caste, religion, gender, region, and labor segmentation. At the heart of our struggles remains, especially today, the enduring question of the subaltern life worlds within which our collectivities survive, resist, refuse, and sometimes surrender. Today, as scholars of South Asia, we stand in solidarity with our fellow educators in occupied Palestine, who have renewed their call for international academic institutions to stand with Palestinian people. To fail to do so would be an abdication of scholarly and ethical responsibility. We insist on the recognition of the dignity and value of Palestinian lives and the right of all oppressed people to demand liberation and self-determination. I'm also strongly obliged here to note the long-standing affinities between Zionism, Hindutva, and US empire that have been further heightened through the military interdependence that we see here today. Now, this relationship, of course, impacts ongoing Indian settler violence in Kashmir, as well as the widespread rise of authoritarianism in South Asia. I apologize for this long introduction, but we are at a moment in which such terms need to be reiterated to remind us again where we are. Now, I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Omar Kasmani, who is part of our series for this year, which is called Futures. And Dr. Kasmani has thought about that question quite a lot, which is why I couldn't think of a more perfect person. Now, I've had the pleasure of learning, reading, and engaging with Omar's work for more years than I can account for. And every time I return to it, it has been a moment of pleasure, discovery, and epistemic frisson, as we say. Dr. Omar Asmani is trained in cultural studies and social anthropology, and his research is situated at the nexus of gender, sexuality studies, migration, and affect theory. And Omar is currently a lecturer at Freie University in Berlin. His first monograph, which is brilliant, and I had the pleasure of blurbing it, is called Queer Companions, Religion, Public Intimacy, and Saintly Affects in Pakistan, which was published by Duke University Press and was awarded the very prestigious 2023 Ruth Benedict Prize for Outstanding Single-Authored Monograph by the Association of Queer Anthropology. I imagine the book will get many more awards. This is just the first award of many. The ethnography, which is supple, deft, and theoretically dense, is based on his long-term fieldwork in Sehwan, an ancient site of multi-faith pilgrimage in Pakistan. More recently, he has also published an edited volume, which is called Pakistan Desires, Queer Futures Elsewhere, also by Duke, which is a collection of essays, meditations, dispatches, which reflects and invites meanings adhering to queerness in Pakistan. Now, I think today he's going to speak about his broader epistemological project. We try to encourage speakers to be experimental, to try stuff that's a bit raw, because our audiences are robust, enthusiastic, and always willing to engage. So Omar has been kind enough to heed that call, as it were. So his broader epistemological project understands the Global South not merely as an area, but as trajectories of affect, ethno-historical fabulations, translated or slanted through Arabic to Urdu concepts. I imagine Omar will share some of that new work with us today. Now, before I turn it over to him, just a few housekeeping questions. We encourage you to stay muted while Omar speaks, but after the conversation is, after the talk is over, we will turn on your videos, and we urge you to show your faces, if you will. It's always heartening for the speaker to see welcome faces across the globe. And that's why we have stuck to this as a Zoom seminar instead of a webinar, despite of the trolling, etc. So if you have questions, please message them to me in chat, and I will moderate and invite you to ask your question if you feel comfortable, or otherwise read them out as needed. All right, so without further ado, let's begin the mehfil and turn it over to Omar.
Thank you so much, Anjali. Can you hear me properly? And this is an absolute treat to be able to share my work at the center. I'm really grateful for the invitation, but also for the long-term companionship. I've drawn so much from the excellent support that I've received from you, the love, the dosti, the pyar. You've been a comrade, a mentor par excellence. I'm grateful to the Center for South Asian Studies for hosting me today, and especially to Radhika Prasad for this, for the support I've received throughout. So there's some technical issue we were trying to deal with. So I'm looking at a screen and trying to speak to you and also look towards the audience. So there'll be a bit of, I think there's a crisis of orientation, but I think that should not take us away from the topic at least. I'll try my best to do both. So today's title, or the topic, as you know, is Queer Religiously and Other Companion Stories. And hopefully both these things will get sort of explored as we go through this presentation, which is more of a paper because I'm not sharing slides or anything. So I hope you'll stay with me as I share this work. I've been thinking a lot lately of what the work of futuring looks like in times as horrid as these, on the edge of ecological disaster, amid the rise of the right, while a genocide is underway, and as we witness the collapse of the West as a moral project. What is there to look forward to, you know, in a way, when futures we once thought would be queer feel straight as an arrow? Though this is not precisely the topic, what I'm trying to say is that some of these concerns are quietly present in this attempt at thinking companionship with you all. This is kind of work that is sort of emerging from the book. It's not so much about the book. Now the book has been out for almost 2 years. So what I'm trying to convey is that an earlier hopeful and futural tenor of this particular material that I'm sharing today has been replaced by a more presentist reading, if I may call it. Basically, less future, more now, or perhaps future in the present tense. So if you were expecting a lot of futurity, I don't think you'll get that. The other way I can describe my talk or preface this talk is that I see it as a beside-the-scenes view of my book. Queer Companions, as I said, I won't talk about the book so much, but I will rely on it every now and then. One could say this is one story among several that approach the embroiling affects that led to the book's writing, or better still, were simultaneous to its making, what I have come to call other companion stories, part of the title. Now, these stories privilege the work of life over field work, labors that are often parallel, always coterminous, but usually do not make the ethnographic cut or escape frames of field work, at least for anthropologists, or stories that fall on the wayside and which we are able to tell only in the wake of something. In that sense, these are also learnings that come to me as an afterlife of the book. One such story that I will tell today is about a religiously inspired dream. I returned to this vision almost 18 years after the fact to understand how it was a rough premonition to the unraveling of life, faith, and sexuality that accompanied 9 years of fieldwork. In a way, this sort of aligns with the new work that I'm doing, which is about my relationship to Berlin. This work, what I'm presenting, is not about Berlin at all, but it has that auto-theoretical spirit to it, so to speak, or character to it. But akin to the work I do in the book or in Queer Companions, here too, or in this presentation, queer and religion are not regarded as antagonists, rather companionable figures, one inflecting the other always. So let's begin with a companion story. This one is called Once Upon a Queer Dream. Well, not a dream to be precise, a sequence of rather three. And not a dream that comes to the dreamer, but one that the dreamer invites, a ritual act Muslims call istikhara. The year of the said dream sequence is 2006. I'm an architect in Karachi and in a loving but complicated relationship. For some years, I've been contemplating the idea of quitting architecture, and finally I can see a way out. It's a cultural studies program in London which would gladly have me. Now, not many people around me are thrilled by the idea. Most think it is unwise, if also outright whimsical. Change is not an easy prospect in my case. It'll mean giving up a secure path and a steady income. It'll mean becoming a student again. It'll mean living apart from my partner. But above all, it'll mean not knowing where this path will lead us. Only one of my mentors, a queer architect who taught me at art school, thinks it's worth plunging into untested waters, as he put it. But his, I know, is an unpopular view, even among friends and well-wishers. My parents are disappointed that I did not consult them before applying to the program in London, very Pakistani of them. My partner, while supportive, fears that living away could tear us apart. Years later, it will. But we do not know this just yet. Weeks of discussion and no decision in sight. In an observant Muslim family such as ours, istikhara makes sense to everyone. It is that act by which a believer, when confronted with a crucial dilemma, invites divine word or guidance, or on a decision through an affective recourse to dreaming. No one at home doubts this will be a life-altering decision, so a dream I invite, and dream I do. Splendid. But more remarkable in my case, however, is that I'm able to remember its contents the next morning. It is a dream in 3 consecutive fragments. In the first one, I'm walking down the 3 flights of stairs of the very building in which I used to work, while holding a book in my hand. On every landing, I run into someone from the architecture practice who tries to persuade me otherwise. And on each of these encounters, I reiterate my determination to leave. The first dream ends with me exiting the office building. In the second fragment, I'm walking into a park in Karachi's city center, not far from my workplace. The setting is marble white, the layout geometric, the mood rather serene. Water fountains abound as a scene of Islamic prayer unfolds on its lush green lawns, pretty much a reflection of paradise in the Islamic garden designs of South Asia. In the final fragment, I find myself at our family home. Ferociously leaping at me are various animals, but standing in the way is a thin screen made of wire mesh, a common device used to keep insects out in Karachi. I stay unharmed in the dreamscape. The next day, as I recount my dreams, whether it was at the dining table, while sharing a meal, or afterwards over tea, I'm now unable to recall, the family is all ears. Sharing dream accounts, even if infrequent, were not rare occasions in our home. My mother has always been a dreamer. So frequent were her visions that among the few books she kept, one was on how to interpret dreams as per the Islamic tradition. The rest of us, whether avid dreamers or otherwise, capable interpreters or not, knew well that taking dreams seriously meant learning how to affectively respond to them. The book in hand, The Prayer in a Paradisical Park, Preservation from Harm, if not entirely converted to the idea, figures of the dreamscape spoke effectively to my loved ones, offered them comfort, sufficient reassurance. So long as to invite a dream was to invite a future, now come what may and unfold what might, as a result of my decision, the istikhara meant that Allah was officially in the loop. Now, divined or not, queer or otherwise, futures, as we all know, can be hard to hold on to. In the aftermath of the said dreams, what I have come to appreciate is how my recourse to dreaming back then wasn't so much about the future as it was about the present. So dream as an affective technology for uninheriting the present. That's what I'm trying to get at. In fact, at the time, the dream sequence or its translation into a narrative became a pivot for all manner of departures, not just quitting architecture, but also the ways in which I came to dispense with earlier orientations, be they intellectual, religious, sexual, or the path by which I have come into my queer self, the lines and loves that could not be salvaged in the process, the long journey into anthropology, or my eventual migration from Karachi to Berlin. As I return to the dream sequence, 18 years on, I regather the tenuous and now partially lost ways in which a religiously inspired dream, istikhara, has acted as a queer vision in my life, an enduring force of unstraightness, if you will, that reorders a straight past into a queer present. I'm not suggesting that dreams be taken as literal windows into the future, whose truth can only be revealed after the fact. I'm rather seduced by the idea that desires, some articulated, others obscured, come folded inside dreams. That dreaming spills some of those desires out into expanded realms of knowing, that no matter where they come from, a divine realm or the secular unconscious, dreams, when taken seriously, are animate forces through which our ties to the world are made, unmade, and remade. Now, we know that dreams in many a tradition, not just Islamic, qualify as a reliable mode of thinking and acting in the world. Not exactly imagined, dreams, as Muslim theologians and scholars of Islam will tell you, derive from the imaginal, a distinct and betwixt realm of perception and reality. Key to Sufi cosmologies, and drawn particularly from the 13th century writings of the Arab Andalusian philosopher Ibn al-Arabi, the imaginal is a significant mode of perception that correlates forms of seeing and varieties of perception across wakefulness and dreaming. It involves both the eye of sense perception and the eye of imagination, and requires the dreamer to also be an unveiler, that is, to discern between imaginal and sensory objects. Now, such knowing or unveiling isn't restricted to the dreamscape. Manifold labors of interpreting become necessary in the wake of a vision in waking life. So borders between the real and the imaginal, the ways in which Ibn al-Arabi is thinking, are also tested in other people's thinking. I'm thinking of my friend Iskandar Abdullah's musings on queerness and the queerness of exile, as he puts it, when he notes that in migration, things are not in their place, faces are blurry, events are unpredictable, space and time are out of joint. So in a way, the affective labors necessary to make sense of migrant reality to him are very much akin to how a dream feels like. Now, just as dreaming takes both interpretive skill and practice, it is more than a visual experience, a highly corporeal phenomenon. In her account of dreams from a saint, Catherine Ewing describes feeling the Sufi master's touch on her fingers or the physical sensation of being awoken in the middle of the night. Now, if it sutures waking life with realms of perception that lie beyond it, dreaming can also be an occasion. It can involve a visit from a saintly figure, just as it can stand for a visitation to a sacred site, pilgrimage even. So there's this whole tradition of performing pilgrimage, going to Mecca or to other holy sites in the dream. So it kind of replaces or stands for the physical journey itself. Amira Mittermeier, a wonderful anthropologist who I'm really fond of, compellingly argues that dreams have material consequences which spill into waking life. In her work on shrines in Egypt, one of the things she attributes to dreams is their power to move people and places. Dreams move dreamers, she says. She also points to how such visions can foreshadow or even bring about future events. So her main argument has to do with complicating ideas of religious agency, basically how believers don't just act in the world, but are also acted upon. The question I have been flirting with, and to which I would honestly say I do not have exactly an answer, is the following. So long as we agree on the power of dreams to touch us, to act in and upon our lives, to affectively accompany the present so as to effectively displace it, how might we then apprehend the capacities of a religiously inspired form, istikhara, to deliver us from straight presents or encumbered pasts into queerer, kinder futures? It is this query that animates this text, this thinking. The next section is called Dreams Move Dreamers. 3 years into the Istikhara, I crossed paths with Zahida in Sehwan, Pakistan's most beloved site of multi-faith pilgrimage. It's where I conducted fieldwork over a period of 9 years. It's also where my book, Queer Companions, is set. So by 2009, when we meet, Zahida and I, Zahida is no ordinary pilgrim or homemaker. By then, I am no longer an architect. In a sense, we are in the future. I'm a researcher in the field, and she is a fakir in saintly pursuit. Zahida, to borrow her turn of phrase, is in the line, awaiting a mystical outcome, 1,000-odd kilometers away from home and family. Saintly dreams explain her presence or her place at a saint's shrine, which is also her place in the world. Listening to her, I first come to reflect how dreams can be queer visions, insofar as these enable women to see beyond domestic horizons, to move away from home, to frustrate and circumvent heteropatriarchal norms of religious authority, disrupt duties of family, lead more public lives, find less given futures beyond scopes of the domestic. In many ways, this is the argument I make in the book, which is tied to one's relation to saintly objects and one's relations with saints, so to speak. Now, as parallel as our worlds are, Zahida and I, in 2009, are crossing paths in the wake of our own visions. I too am in Sehwan as a result of dreaming, in the line of something, awaiting an outcome, possibly also on the move. 4 years later, Zahida narrated yet other dreams to me to retrospectively explain a life in disarray, well, because futures famously go awry. She questioned her orientation to the saint as much as she worried about her relations at home, with her husband and family. She was treading a thin line between what one could call finding futures and losing faith. Crisis felt ordinary in her accounts, as did an unraveling of my own. The book chapter, In Other Guises, Other Futures, is precisely about that crisis and how Zahida chooses to navigate it over the 4 years that I knew her. Happening alongside, though never making into the book, and that's why this is the other companion story, was a crisis of inheritance of my own. Relationships, sexuality, faith, things I knew, or as I knew them, were all up in the air. The plunge into untested waters was no longer a metaphor, and figures and fictions of the dream demanded a reckoning with. Dreamers return to the dream as a way to account for what has come to be it in Zahida's narrativization of her case in 2013, or of my own in this moment as I share this, points to the intellectual and affective labors that become necessary in dreams' wake, the work of interpretation, so to speak. It helps recognize that dreams, whether received or invited, queer or otherwise, are not promises of any kind, rather illuminations of desire that make the move towards other worlds possible. Arriving at those other worlds is, however, a different story. In another chapter of Queer Companions, I attempt to make sense of the childhood dreams of another fakir, whom I lovingly call Baba, in their entanglements with visions of the state. Baba was a fakir who had moved to Sehwan on the basis of their saintly dreams, a narrative account I was given almost every time we met over 9 years. These dream accounts reveal how, in turning toward the saint, Baba turns away from a life with the Khaja Sara, which is the local community of trans women, a most likely trajectory for a child assigned intersex in Pakistan, as was Baba's case. And thus, also, this turning away is also from the socially prescribed, communally rooted, and economically secure gender variant futures, right? So a lot of these trans women, Khaja Sara, live in these communes. So there's already a gender variant future available to Baba, which they turn away from as they turn towards the saint. What strikes me still is how Baba's moving involves not only their dream-inspired journey from Punjab to Sindh, home to shrine, neither is the norm only put to test by abandoning inheritances of family in favor of an ascetic life, a move, a trajectory I have identified as common to fakir lives. Here, moving also meant a significant departure from the ordinary unfolding of queer futures. For both Baba and myself, such departures proceed from, are in fact predicated upon, the religious form of the dream. One inspired, the other invited, and also the dream's persuasive pull. In both instances, visions accompany and advance life projects of going astray, being queer. It involves a tarrying with uncertainty and sustain an orientation to the unrevealed, the unknown. It returns us to the insight, to Amira Mitamai's insight, that dreams move dreamers. In fact, the fakirs I came to know over the years also turned to dreams to savor and experience the fullness of the world. Dreams were a means to access remote figures, feel and mobilize removed histories of place. Through such processes, those in saintly pursuits were able to craft their wholes across realms, and so doing their unique place in the world. Dreamingly, one could argue, fakirs found saintly allies to encounter rival fakirs and demonic forces, become embroiled in knotty processes involving more than human figures. All such aspects illustrate to me how dreaming is not a solitary activity, but a mode of companionship. That the dream offers that intimate and imaginal fold through which dreamers cultivate a sense of solidarity across realms, divine and mortal, between human and more than human figures. So doing, they not only question the singularity of action in the world, the boundedness of the here and now, they also effectively respond to the incompleteness of the present and the concerns with future or the anxiety around futures. I want to now speak about a bit about companionship and intimacy. I've tried to sort of take this account of the dream and I've tried to bring it to how I understand it, not as a solitary activity, but as a mode of companionship. And this helps me speak about the ways in which companionship and intimacy operate in my work. In the book also, but also these are concepts that loom large across my various projects between the work on Pakistan and the current book project on Berlin. Early on in my research, a pilgrimage, as I said, the pilgrimage town, a fakir interlocutor of mine reprimanded me for asking too many questions, while also pointing me to the virtues of adjacency. He said to me, "Learn to sit by the sea of secrets, and the sea will reveal its secrets unto you." In this suggestion of his, to sit by and to be with were more than just acts of hanging out. These were also modes of knowing. Fast forward to now. In her afterword to Pakistan Desires, a multi-chapter volume that I have had the fortune of editing, which Anjali also mentioned, our very own Anjali, who offered a wonderful afterword, evokes the concept of mehfil to indicate how gathering, and I now rely on her words, summons publics into lives of conversation and proximity, at once a place of frenzied engagement and quiet meditation. The Hindustani Urdu word mehfil means assembly, celebration, forum, party. In that sense, hers is a call to gather in affection or to sit with attention. When it comes to gathering, there is also the adjacent concept of majlis, literally sitting, also the space or room where one sits in Arabic. But as a gathering in Muslim South Asia, Majlis is a site of historical remembrance, especially in Shia Islamic context, and mostly associated with realms of women. And in these majlis or majalis, the mourning of the tragedy of Karbala takes place, and it forms a sense of community among Shia women at large. Thus, to sit together as majlis or in one, if we think of it as a room, is to sit with history effectively, but also with affect. And it's a concept that I keep returning to now in the current moment. I've understood this idea of finding community in this current moment when things are really sort of going crazy in Berlin. We've had the need to come together, to grieve, to mourn, to think about our futures in a place like Germany. And Majlis has been that concept, has become that space of gathering, has become that form that helps us mourn, that helps us grieve, that helps us agitate and come up with what we want to do. So it's a concept which I think is intimate with Anjali's idea of mehfil, of sitting with history. I can also offer the Urdu concept of Hamsafar. Now it's becoming a constellation of ideas. You won't remember everything, but still. Now Hamsafar literally means the one we share a journey with, the affective partner that one shares a journey with. Now these are ways to talk about how companionship in my work is both concept and method, that overarching lens through which we can appreciate how objects correlate or bodies correlate in situations of co-presence, are altered through adjacency, but also how affect is indispensable to what's going on in scenes of attachment and scenarios of intimacy. So whether it's mehfil, majlis, hamsafar, whatever the terms, I'm interested in thinking with affects that arise, emerge, circulate when two or however many objects or bodies, be they physical or analytical, find themselves in each other's companies, spend time together, so to speak, or are simply adjacent. Now, those familiar with the book would know that in the book, I draw on another concept, sohbat, which is a Sufi concept, and which at its capacious best ties discourse with intercourse, sacrality with sexuality, desire with divinity. Sohbat can mean a conversation in Farsi, but in Urdu, it can also be a polite word for sex. Sohbat is also the act of transmitting knowledge between a Sufi master and a disciple, between murid and a sheikh. It helps make the case that being in the company of or at the side of something or someone can be a figure of careful attendance, a source of parallel affection, affinity, a kind of affection that I'm also trying to draw between Fakir lives and mine. I'm speaking of a being with such that sharing fields or journeys can involve tender rivalries, but is at the same time about an attentiveness to the other's tactile presence, a feeling for their moves, a cautious give and take of leanings, push and pull of affects, but never about one triumphing over the other. Now, such thinking with these concepts in more narrow terms of my work is an alternative to queering, which I increasingly feel is too often about appropriating a thing. In its worst form, a queer jacketing, tailoring something to a queer cut of our choice. So in the book, I do distance myself from projects of Islamizing queer or queering Islam. And this is all kind of relevant to that idea. Now, in his critique of European forms of knowing, Edouard Glissant notes that the verb to grasp contains the movement of hands that grab their surroundings and bring them back to themselves. To me, sometimes queering feels akin to that. Queering, you see, is a doing that involves little reciprocity. That we queer a thing doesn't automatically suggest that we are queered by it in return or are queerer as a result of it. In contrast, companionship is closer to Glissant's ideal of going on and with, as he calls it. So a journey, rather, whereby companions learn from one another, are even transformed by virtue of sharing space and time, hamsafari, so to speak, or simply by being with or adjacent to another, just how the fakir had had suggested I do. Now, in the book's framework and the specific context of my research, which of course is about a religious setting, I describe my intellectual labors as doing queer religiously. Here, queerness, so we get to the other part of the title. Here, queerness cannot be neatly folded into concerns of identity or rights and representation. In fact, it becomes an invitation to grapple with queer as it flourishes in, tarries with, or presents itself publicly in religious life worlds and sacred ecologies. These are capacious conceptualizations of queer that, in my view, remain undervalued, if not entirely underimagined, by dominant theory, queer theory. The incitement, once again, is that queer is not external to religious ecologies, that it lurks ordinarily in religious life worlds, just as this queerness is not devoid of religious aesthetic and sacred affect. In a way, what I'm saying is there's nothing to be queered here. Rather, changes, alterations, transformations I'm describing through companionship or that I'm interested in charting, whether they happen through companionship, co-presence, taking a journey together, sitting by and with, as we talked about. These are all mutual affordances. That is to say, we're coming along or journeying together as partners or collectives is central to what can be accomplished. And what is accomplished is that we couldn't have imagined, undertaken, or achieved just by ourselves. Again, not solitary, but in companionship. This is also what dreams make us understand, right? That we do not act alone in the world, less so on our own. That dreaming eventually is that genre by which we find ourselves in greater company, liaise with more than living, more than human figures, extend our affective limbs to touch that is what not made available to us in the present, and so doing, push the limits of our socio-historical reach and relations. The following section, I call it Future in the Present Tense. So the story of my own dream, as I now tell it, is thickened by what Fakir dreams have taught me. To summon partial connections, as I'm attempting to do across Fakir lives and my own, is by no means to claim commensurability. I'm aware at how different these worlds are, how parallel these realities are of the researcher and the researched. So that is not the point. My point, I think, to trace such parallel affections, what I'm able to do is to extend the conversation. One of the things I'm able to do is to extend the conversations of the book to spaces of affect that are not quite elaborated therein. So as this idea of other companion stories, having a beside the view kind of a view to the book. But it also helps me sharpen the ways in which I evoke companionship as a space of bloom in the book. So in that sense, it extends the conversations of the book. It is the afterlife of the book. I've come to understand that dreams can be queer visions insofar as they untether the dreamer, Baba, Zahida, or myself, from encumbered places and pasts and propels us into futures that are unstraight, unknown, and sometimes not of our liking. In that sense, dreaming is not merely an affective technology for divination, a future-facing form, so to speak. I'm beginning to think of it as a queer companion to the present, as a means of continuing to continue to leverage Abdul Malik Simon's insight on endurance. It would follow that to proceed in dream's wake is a form of fidelity that does not hang on a dream coming true, but rather on its continuing ability to steer us out of the present, hopefully also out of an impasse. And this is what I learned from Fakir Lives, but also the story of my own journey as I shared today. Now, surely dreaming had helped my Fakir interlocutors and myself across parallel realities and in very distant worlds to take leave from the present. But how might we step into a future we once dreamed would be queer? What are we left with after a dream, or when futuring returns us to an oppressive present, the likes of which we had once sought to exit, escape, overcome? In the breaks, Julieta Singh turns to queer pedagogy for parenting as a way to uninherit a world at the brink of political, ecological ruin. She names her project Mothering at the End of the World, which is also a call to collectively build another world, as she says, not a new one, but in her words, this one toppled and reborn. Dreams, I think, might not be promises, but dreams are visions nonetheless. Visions that break the usual course of things, visions that afford new holes and bring other horizons into view. In a world that will not accommodate us, dreams hold within themselves an ensemble of defined practices, poetics, affects, and abstractions like the ones Julieta Singh turns our attention to, and that might well be one queer path towards feeling other possible worlds. And so I dream in solidarity. I leave it at that. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Shukriya, Omar. That was wonderful. And as someone who has read, I think, pretty much everything you've written, I was struck by how much I could follow in terms of what you've done and what was sort of blossoming out of the things that I already knew. Before we turn to questions, we have plenty of time. I would really invite all of you to show your lovely faces if you feel up to it. It's a great way for Omar to feel your love. This is about queer companionship, but also for us to see each other across oceans, and everyone looks fantastic for me anyway. So I encourage you, unwashed, unbathed as you are, to expose you. Okay. So Omar, I will take the moderator's privilege to start us off. We have several questions in the queue. And my question is about something that I thought about when I read your book, even though there was not that much about dream, qua dream, is because you ended also with genre. So I was thinking, well, what is the relationship between dream and fantasy? And I mean this in the kind of hermeneutic sense, right? Because the idea that Freud and Lacanian ideas between conscious and unconscious, that doesn't quite work in the kind of epistemic registers of Islam and Sufism that you're reading through. But I was struck by that. I mean, what's the difference? Because if you invoke dream and you invoke the kind of infrastructure, theoretical infrastructure of dreams, you are also inevitably going to run into this idea of the phantasmatic, right? So what is the role of is the dream the phantasmatic as well? Because in terms of genres of representation, they are quite separate for most people, right? So yes, you have this sort of ummah that allows us to cross socio-geopolitical spaces. But, anyway, I was struck by that. And then the second, please don't answer all, answer whatever you fancy. The second is I couldn't quite sort of figure out the relationship. If the ishtakara is about seeking, again, I have very bad knowledge, seeking goodness, right? I remember the ishtakara dua and the prayer and all of that. So what is the form of the ask? Is it, I wrote down, is it seeking? Is it a willingness? Is it a practice? Is it a riyaz of ishtakar? You keep, dreaming because you said someone dreams to. So I wanted to know a little bit about the kind of, it's not directions, but the kinds of tenets of that ishtakar, like which way, because willing is different from asking, practice, ritual. So don't answer all, just answer whatever you fancy, because we have lots of your groupies waiting to ask you questions. So.
Sure. Thank you, Anjali. It's always very generative to have your interlocution and to have your voice. I'll start with the second one. I mean, so the istikhara in terms of, yes, it is a seeking very clearly, because you invite a dream by performing, by reading a particular verse and by performing 2 rakat. So you do a prayer, like the ritual prayer. So it's not just, it's not just praying like this, but it's actual, you do the act of namaz or the salat. And you, before that, you seek, and then you do it before bedtime, right? So there are all these kinds of ways in which you do. And then what you do by seeking, you also open yourself up to reception, right? It also goes back to this whole question of how the dream is a particular fraction of the revelation, and that's why it holds such a big it holds a certain kind of value, right? It's all about, and I think it goes back to, somehow it connects to your question. What distinguishes it is the question of the source, or the belief where it's coming from. So the idea that you invite a dream, which is supposed to be a fraction of the revelation. So by dreaming, you share the experience of prophecy in a very weak form, right? There's even in Islamic theology, they even describe what the fraction is. I don't know what the fraction is, like what 1/64th of it, or I don't know, 1/16th of it, I don't know. But they even talk about that. So what you are experiencing, what you share, is this larger historical experience of receiving prophecy, right? And then the whole thing of interpreting begins from the next day onwards. I mean, sometimes you don't remember dreams or recall dreams the next day. So I was really stunned when I usually don't recall my dreams. And, you know, the fact that I had remembered in such precise detail, even now, speaks for some kind of, you know, the ways in which people invest themselves. So I think seeking, and then also being porous, you know, allowing oneself to be a receptacle, and using that also as a spiritual experience. I think that is what really, yeah. Perhaps that's an answer to, or a reaction.
That's very helpful, and you know, we will of course talk more anon. I'm going to ask my colleague and dear friend Mayanti Fernando to go next. Mayanti, just unmute yourself, please.
Thanks, Anjali, and thanks, Omar. This was such a beautiful talk. Thank you. I've learned a lot, and I want to keep thinking with you actually about the way that you ended your response to Anjali about the source in some sense, and about the question of God. And so I was curious, and I've struggled with this with Amira's work as well, and I think she's going in a slightly different direction to think more about God. In her new,
yes.
When she writes about dreams that move dreamers, and dreamers who are acted upon, there's another figure there, which is the divine, right? So it's God who sends the dream. It's, you know, God who acts upon the human via the dream. So in some ways, yes, the dream is animate, but it's also a modality through which one has a relationship with the divine. And so I was wondering if you could say a little bit more, and I'm really compelled by this, by thinking about that relationship as an intimate one, even with this figure who is, you know, really more than human, right? I mean, Akbar, right? And so, like, the greatest, and humans have access to a fraction of the revelation versus another who has full access, let's say. And so I'm just wondering, say, if you could help me think a little bit about the kind of intimacy that is cultivated through a companionship that is not reciprocal, and that is far from reciprocal in some ways, and yet also intimate, right? Because in some it seems to me that is what the dream enables, is a kind of intimacy with the divine, but quite different from the kind of intimacy that one would have with a partner. This is not a partner, and perhaps a companion, but maybe more than that. So I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more, because I think you're getting at the possibility of a very different kind of relationship with the divine that the dream enables, precisely through the crossing of all kinds of human, non-human borders, but a relationship that is really intimate.
This is a very, thank you, Mayanti. This is a very rich question. It's interesting. You think, I've not thought of intimacy as not reciprocal, for example. What I have considered is that when I say that these are mutual affordances, I don't mean that these are egalitarian relations. So questions of hierarchy remain, you know. So even when I think of sohbet, there is a sheikh and there's a murid, right? Or there is divine. And so it's not about egalitarian relations, but it's about the idea that one can inflect the other to whichever degree possible, that one that one can invite a dream, let's say. So you have, of course, an authority, or you believe in a divine source that will send the dream, but then you also make something out of it. It's not a passive state of, okay, now I received it. I mean, even the dreams I had, I made it, I turned it into something, right? I made it into a narrative. I understood in certain ways, and now I explain my life according to it. This is all work that I am sort of, this is my reciprocity in a way. It doesn't mean that it holds the same power or it holds the same value, but it's an interesting provocation. I've started to think about intimacy also it's very new to me, but intimacy as a non-affirmative space, right? As a space of injury or violence, right? So intimacy, of course, can also be that, but my work doesn't cover it. And I'm now beginning to think, and it goes in some of that non-reciprocal intimacy might also sort of can explore that space as well that you're describing. The question of the divine in Amira's work, what I find really compelling, or the part which I, let's say, run with, is the fact that she's describing this whole thing of dreams coming from an elsewhere, right? She's talking about a spatial dimension of dreams. So I don't see so much of God there. Of course, she's now writing about God, and I know that the divine is there, present. But the way the divine is parsed is through the question of space. That it's a realm, right, from where these what she calls an elsewhere. So I find that really compelling to think about. And then one of the things she also says, it's not just dreams doesn't move only people; it also moves places. There are shrines that are moved because of a particular dream, right? Or shrines that are constructed because of a particular dream. As she says, there are several shrines to Zainab or Fatima and stuff like that. And the idea that, and it doesn't seem there's no contradiction there. There's no paradox there. I mean, people accept that Zainab can be in multiple places, or Fatima can be in multiple places because of the authority that dream lends to that structure or to that. But I think this question, I will keep thinking about it. I think it's a really rich question. I have not really thought of intimacy that's not reciprocal. One more thing I will just say, when this idea of this intimacy or this relation is quite different from what one would have with a partner, for example. I was surprised that some fakirs, I mean, now I'm going back to the book, would use concepts that were quite sexual. So it's interesting that their understanding of sexual intimacy informs their understanding of spiritual intimacy, right? So there was a kind of and I've made the argument that here, in this context, sexuality is conversant with sacrality, that they're not seen as opposing figures. But of course, so for example, they talked about consummation, they talked about marriage, with the saint. I mean, all those kinds, they use the word nikah. They talked about controlling desire, all those kinds of things, being celibate, which can be charted onto physical aspects of intimacy, while knowing that they're talking about different things and it doesn't mean the same thing, right?
Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Omar, for that very, I think, open response, and my auntie for that question, as always. Next, I'm going to call on my other wonderful colleague, Nidhi Mahajan, who also has a question. The anthros are super enthu today, which is making my heart very sad. So take it away.
Enthu is a nice term.
Okay, Nidhi,
And the anthros are really glad to be here and to have heard this incredible talk. Thank you so much. Big fan of your book as well. So I'm just actually, it's really been powerful. Just, going off of also some of my question relates to, this question of the divine that my auntie brought up. And you're thinking, you draw on Ibn Arabi at certain points, right? And I'm just, kind of going off of that and thinking through Ibn Arabi and, concepts of Wahadat al-Wujud, the unity of being, as a kind of way in which this question of intimacy can perhaps be like an entry point into this question of intimacy and companionship, that if you do not have this divide between the self and the other and God, right? that if there are moments in which one can access it, right? The dream being one of them, where the relational aspects of that, and you draw on glissant as well. So I'm wondering if there's a way in which actually the notion of, well, you do that in your book with companionship, but even here, the dream itself is not just, I mean, perhaps I'm just, thinking out loud here, that there's a point of access to that wahadat al-wujud, the unity of being, right? Or a way to access the divine, but it's a relational kind of concept, right? I'm just thinking with Ibn al-Arabi here, right? And what that means in terms of like your conception of the dream or the divine or intimacy, right? Because it kind of turns other notions askew, so to speak. Just thoughts. I don't know. I guess this turned into
totally. I mean, I would say as a response, this whole Wahdatul Wujud thing, the unity of being, is present in this imagination, both of my dreaming, or it informs that, and the fakir lives that I've worked with. But the ways in which I work with intimacy, I'm actually resisting that in a way. I'm saying I'm not talking about that kind of intimacy, because I say for intimacy to actually function and operate, you need to have distinction. You need to have, and that's why I call intimacy a critical distance in the book, right? I say it's that critical space between being near a thing and being nearly that thing. So for me, that space defines a relation of intimacy, because then it is unity. If we, so the whole, if you are not two distinct bodies, if there's no division between the divine and the self, or the fakir and the saint, or the saint and the god, then it's not intimacy. This whole idea of the annihilation into the divine or the truth, the Sufi kind of, the ideal. So I think that ideal informs informs why people want to be intimate, right? It informs these relations, but these relations are about intimacy and not unity. And I think that would be a different project if we think about collapsing that divide. I think the blurring is present, and that informs why people approach that. So it's it's an intimacy approaching unity, this thing between, as I said, between being near a thing and being nearly that thing. So, yeah.
I think that clarification is helpful, Omar, because one of the things you're also asking for, I think, and I think, Nidhi, this is how it's not theoretical translation, but it's theoretical movement across terms, etc. Because I think theoretical translation is much more clunkier a form. And I think I see more movement, in your questions. We have a couple more if you're, up for it, Omar, because there are lots more, but I'm trying to contain the enthusiasm online. So I'm going to turn to my queer comrade from another campus, Zirvat Chaudhary, who's brought her cat along to add to the joyous festivities. Her cat is unfortunately quite cute, even though I don't like cats. So take it away, Zirvat.
It's actually her question. She's very inspired, Omar. Thank you so much. I have to say, Omar, listening to your talk, which was so moving, and I don't have a very scholarly question today, but one that really touched a kind of a set of, nodes in my family history. And I was thinking very much, as you're thinking, as you're like talking about intimacy and dreaming, within this kind of philosophical lens, I was thinking about its sort of resonance in a strangely geopolitical life in my family. So my mother's family, I'm from Bangladesh, and my mother's family on her father's side were largely murids of the Pir clan in Peshawar. And she kind of strangely rebelled against this by the incidence of a dream where she saw this man in her dream who turned out to be a descendant of the Jilani clan, I guess, right? And he had arrived in Dhaka, this is in the Pakistan era, as I think he was a diplomat, an Iraqi diplomat. And this is the story, right? I have no idea. So, and my mom has passed away, so I can't go back and ask her. But she saw him in a dream, and she realized she needed to become his murid. And so she went to the hotel where he was staying. So I have no idea what the innuendos of all of this are. And she declared to him that she had received him in a dream. And I loved your description of almost the dreaming as a praxis to Anjali's question about fantasy and dreaming. And I say this because this was the only time in her life she met her, her teacher. And yet a big part of how that relationship was maintained or enacted was actually in the wake of the Iraq War. And I remember my dad even took me in London one time to go visit the descendants of my mother's Pir Sahib, because we were still supporting them in this moment of displacement, even though they were also kind of very privileged in their own ways. So I was just very curious about, as we're talking about intimacy and reciprocity, how there are these ways in which these acts of dreaming are also about kind of other extensions of, if not reciprocities of, I don't know if it's kin or community or what, and especially in these moments, and I said the word geopolitical because in these moments where lines are being drawn and redrawn territorially, it seems as well. And, another expression of that was that, the men in my mother's family would all be buried in Peshawar. And my grandfather, when he died, right on the heels of 1970, the war in 1971, had to be buried in Sirhind because it was not available for him to. So there's something very, there's something in what you were describing through a kind of poetics and praxis that also seemed to manifest in terms of how people continue to remain and maintain attachments. In the wake of other kufas, for lack of a better word. So I'm sorry that this is not a very, like I mentioned, very deep question, but there was just something lurking in this as you were talking. And I kept thinking of these little, nodes in my family that have not really made sense in a different way until I heard you talk today.
Thank you, Zurat. No, I'm very glad to just have an affective response as well. I mean, not that everything has to be a scholarly discourse and not everything has to be a theoretical question or something like that. I think these kinds of stories, I mean, I grew up in Pakistan. I grew up with all these kinds of stories, not so much in my family, but sort of generally. There are tons of these stories, right? Where people sort of find their teachers or their guides through all kinds of, let's say, situations like dream situations, visionary situations, and these are networks and kin making kind of practices, because I think these have the power of turning strangers into kin, right? They have this kind of, and these are relations that are maintained not just over a lifetime, as you said, but intergenerationally too. Because also I think when you take a sheikh, you're not just relating yourself to the sheikh himself or herself or sheikha, but you also already become part of a kin. You are a guru brother, or you have your brothers and sisters who are other murids of the same sheikh, right? So you plant yourself in a particular network of kin relations. So there are other things as well that operate with it. But I think what I find really rich in what you were describing is the question of geography, borders, politics, the larger question, how this very intimate scale, these relations that actually feel inward and mystical, but they are tied to larger questions and to politics. I mean, I do try to create that bridge in the book to say, these are not only relevant to questions of mystical interiorities and spiritual growth, right? Because that's what we know. These are tied to macro processes. In the book, I tie it to questions of states' governance and those kinds of things, and states' relation to saints. But it echoes what you're trying, the kind of scales you're bringing in your story, or what your story is composed of. It's very it mirrors what I've been thinking about, in the context of the state and the shrine and the ordinary pilgrim who goes there. So across that, I call it a public architecture of intimacy. But here, I mean, you're talking about geopolitics, which also expands it to something which is beyond borders, right? So at the end of the day, I think these are also relations that frustrate questions of boundedness, right? Between whether it's about individuals, and then you can also think spatially, as we were talking with Amira's work. So I'm really happy to have heard this anecdote and story from your mother.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zirvat. Omar, we have 2 more questions. We have lots
Sure.
more, but I will pass them along to you after in the, I know it's very late for you. Omar is in Karachi right now, so I want to be mindful of his generosity as well. So let me turn next to my also wonderful new colleague, Dolly Kikon from Anthropology. They have really stepped up to make the discipline more interesting than it currently is. So take it away. I love to slag on things that I'm not part of. So go ahead, Dolly.
Thank you so much, Omar. And I really enjoyed your talk. And I was thinking about your reflections on futures and mourning. And that's something I wanted to think along with you. Mourning as a sense of community. I was thinking about dreaming and whether, we will, or people will even dream in paradise, in Jannat, right? So dreaming as a sense of an incompleteness of the future that we long for. And so when we think about mourning as a sense of community, your presentation made me think about dreaming and placemaking and politics within the indigenous world itself. So with a deep history of dispossession and violence, I think it took me to this journey when you talked about dreaming as a way of revelation. I thought about healing that a lot of indigenous two-spirit people talk about, and also dreaming as a sense of grounding and groundedness. So when you talk about concepts as method, maybe as a fellow anthropologist, I was thinking along with concept as method and also as practice. Yeah. So whether you thought whether you thought about bringing in any of the indigenous, I think maybe philosophies within your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolly. That's also a wonderful invitation, as you said, to think with, and I think I take this as a comment, but I've not, I think the question of praxis is implied, but I've not really articulated. Practice, okay. Yeah. Practice, yes, the question of practice, I think it's, of course, it's implied there, but it doesn't sort of, I don't conceptually work on it in a way. Even the question of method, the idea of companionship as method is something that has emerged after the book. I think in the book, it works as a concept, and towards in the coda, I was saying epilogue. In the coda, I kind of talk about, I give a hint of what this method could be, but I don't really elaborate it so much. So I think now that the book is out, people read it, people like yourselves. I mean, when you get engagement, there are other possibilities that open up. But this thing, when you were talking about, I found this very interesting when you said, will we be dreaming in paradise? Will there be a need for it or not? It reminded me how sleeping in some of the Islamic kind of concepts is seen as a small death. It's described as a small death. But it's also kind of we all know, I mean, sleeping is also the break from reality, right? It's the moment you need to just restore to be able to face the ugliness of the world again. So I think it's interesting to think about how, if one takes sleeping as death, then what does dreaming do? Like what is dreaming? How does it change how we understand dreaming while being dead, so to speak? So I was just, I'm taking it as a provocation. It's just coming to mind things that you spoke with. Thank you so much. But to directly answer, I've not looked at indigenous concepts so far. It had that sort of relationship hasn't been charted out yet.
Thank you, Dolly. I would say Dolly's work as well, Omar, would be quite helpful to you as well, given I think some similar trajectories that I think her work is also trying to traverse. I want to give the last question to our stellar and sparkling graduate student, Bala.
Oh,
Bala,
lovely.
Bala, please ask away.
Thank you. Thanks, Anjali. Thank you, Omar. So lovely. Listening to every time. It's, yeah, such a fan. Dreams. My question was about the place of, I've been working with utopia and dystopia. I was thinking about the space of a nightmare in the dream, the space for nightmare, and the way we choreograph, remember, return to the dream, remember, improvising the telling of it, and the orality. Can we hear them? Like, could you speak to the, just that, the nightmare and the orality of dreams? Is that part of,
I mean, there's a whole, I haven't thought of the nightmare, although I think it's surprising why I haven't. I mean, given the moment, we should, I think this talk should have been about a nightmare. But the orality or the spokenness of it, let's say, they're also kind of, there's a whole etiquette around it. So in our home, if I were to think of, if I would remember a dream or want to recall it, sometime in the evening, my mother would never allow it. And she would say, one should never tell dreams in the evening. So there was this idea that you should speak about it. So she would say, keep it with you, tell me tomorrow in the morning. So there was this idea that you shouldn't speak about. So it also had a certain kind of etiquette. I'm only thinking, things that come into mind as you ask this question. So there was this whole thing about, also the question of time is interesting. So my mother, or what I grew up with understanding, was that dreams that come closer to dawn are more credible and more reliable, and that they are the ones that come from the right source. Because the dream is, when you talk about nightmare, the dream is a very tricky object, because Muslims believe that the source can also be a demonic source, right? So demons and Satan has the power to come in your dream. And that is why this idea, what Ibn al-Arabi says, that you need to have the skill, you need to be the unveiler, right? You need to know, you need to distinguish between sensory and real, and the source also. So basically, you need a skill. It's not just everyone can dream and everyone can understand those dreams. It takes practice, it takes skill, it takes etiquette to be able to figure out which dreams are credible, which dreams are from which source. So you can be very easily, you could be misguided, misled, and that could be a form that is closer to the question of the night, or a demonic dream or something like that. Does that sort of feel like a reaction?
It's the same thing in Tamil.
I know it's not an answer.
It is. Thank you. It's similar to what they say in Tamil also, like the morning dreams are the ones that come true. But yeah, interesting.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. If I could just urge all of you to unmute yourselves, and talia, everybody, just for Omar's wonderful talk. So
No, thank you.
Across the oceans. Thank you. And I hope as we move forward, our collective dreams make it possible for us to imagine liberation and freedom from all and for all.
I really hope.
To Kashmir, to Palestine, to Ukraine. And we stand in solidarity. Thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you again. Be well, be safe, and Jai Bhim.
Thank you. And I also wanted to thank the people who attended and the participants. Thank you a lot. Thanks a lot. And also for the questions.